The war councils of the Galactic Coalition were always loud, but today the chamber swelled with laughter. High above the floor, hovering in the gravity-stabilized amphitheater, sat generals, admirals, and warlords from 37 species. They spoke in tones ranging from guttural growls to piercing whistles, but the translation matrix rendered every insult into sharp, humiliating clarity. And every insult, it seemed, was aimed at the same group, the humans. "They bring toys," croaked a Saren commander, her carapace gleaming under the chamber lights. She tapped the air with her claw, projecting the image of a human sniper rifle. The weapon floated, rotating slowly, a dark, steel-bodied thing with a long barrel and a scope. Ballistics, chemicals igniting metal. They still hurl stones at one another, dressed in iron shells. "Is this a joke?" Ripples of amusement followed. An Akar admiral flared his 3 wings and sneered. "If they wish to play at war with children's sticks, let them. We'll provide them wooden shields to match." The laughter grew louder, but Elias Rourke sat unmoving. His face was hard, carved with years of sun and dust, his uniform simple. He had long ago learned to let words pass over him like wind against rock. Across the human delegation, a few younger officers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Rourke's eyes were steady, watching the rotating image of his rifle until the projection dissolved. The Coalition's supreme coordinator, a towering being of crystalline flesh named Valith, silenced the chamber with a resonant chime. "Enough. Humanity has been admitted as observers. Their role is limited. Let us focus on the enemy. The enemy, the Threx Dominion, a war-forged empire older than most species in the chamber. The Threx advanced with discipline and precision, their fleets burning colonies in systematic sweeps. The Coalition, mighty though it was, had already suffered heavy losses. This meeting was supposed to inspire confidence, but all Rourke saw was desperation dressed in arrogance. He listened as admirals flaunted weapons, plasma arrays capable of melting mountains, rail cannons that hurled slugs at fractions of light speed, drone swarms with processors fast enough to anticipate every move of an opponent. Yet all their brilliance had cracked against the Dominion like waves on stone. The Threx armor refracted beams. Their jammers hijacked drones. Their counter-artillery had shredded ships that should have been invincible. Still, the Coalition clung to pride. They could not imagine any tool less radiant than their own shining arsenals. They laughed because laughter was easier than fear. After the council adjourned, the delegations dispersed into smaller clusters. A few alien soldiers lingered, pointing at the humans' holstered sidearms with derision. Rourke adjusted the strap on his rifle case and walked past them without glance. Beside him, Lieutenant Callan, younger by a decade and more easily provoked, muttered under his breath. "Bastards don't even realize why they're losing. They don't want to realize," Rourke said. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had seen more battlefields than most of these aliens could imagine. "They built toys they can't stop admiring. Toys that shine too bright. Blind them long enough, they'll walk into a cliff." Callan looked at him sideways. "And us? We don't shine," Rourke said. He shifted the case on his back, its weight comforting. "That's our strength." When they returned to the human quarters aboard the Coalition's flagship, Rourke finally let himself relax, just enough to drop into a chair. The quarters were Spartan, their walls gray and unadorned. The others filed in, medics, engineers, a handful of infantry officers. Most wore expressions of frustration. They had traveled light years to prove themselves and had been relegated to the sidelines like children among adults. A briefing hollow flickered to life at the center of the room. A Coalition officer's monotone voice recited the next deployment orders. Humans would be placed in logistical support roles. Not combat, not even reconnaissance. They were to manage supplies, stabilize wounded soldiers, and keep the real warriors armed and fed. Groans filled the room. Callan cursed under his breath. Rourke simply leaned forward, elbows on knees, and listened until the voice faded. "They'll see," Callan said, his face flushed. "They'll learn the hard way." "Maybe," Rourke said. His eyes drifted to the rifle case leaning against the wall. It wasn't just a weapon. It was discipline forged into steel. It was patience embodied. A sniper's rifle was a contradiction, primitive to the untrained eye, yet refined to an edge that few could match. It required no reactor core, no targeting AI, no tether to a power grid. It required only breath, stillness, and a nerve to wait. Rourke remembered deserts where heat shimmered like ghosts, jungles where sweat stung his eyes, mountains where silence carried like thunder. In each place, the rifle had spoken with finality. He wondered if any of the species in this coalition had ever understood what it meant to wait hours, days, even for the single perfect moment. Somehow he doubted it. The call to deployment came sooner than expected. Coalition fleets had intercepted a Dominion strike force on the edge of the Ashari system. Reports promised a decisive clash, the kind that could tip momentum. The humans boarded transports along with the others, though their place was in the rear. From the viewport, Rourke watched alien ships shimmer with energy as they aligned into formations. Their hulls pulsed with power, weapons glowing with contained fury. They looked magnificent, a symphony of light preparing to drown the stars. Rourke only saw noise, blinding and fragile. The fleet dropped into real space near Ashari. Alarms sang almost instantly. Dominion vessels tore into the formation with ruthless precision, their angular hulls absorbing beams that should have burned through them. Drone swarms launched and fell silent as Dominion hackers seized control. Plasma lances sputtered under strain. The battle turned to chaos. Coalition channels flooded with panic cries as ships broke formation. Rourke stood behind the command pit, arms crossed, watching seasoned admirals scramble. Pride gave way to fear in real time. Beside him, Callan whispered, "They're not invincible." "No," Rourke agreed. His gaze shifted to the tactical display, where Dominion command craft pulsed at the heart of their formation. "But they're predictable. Every system has a flaw. You just have to know where to look." The Coalition tried everything: barges, counterhacks, flanking maneuvers. Nothing stuck. The Dominion pressed forward, cutting through ships like blades through silk. It was a slaughter in slow motion. In the midst of chaos, Rourke remained still, a rock against the tide. He watched, he measured, he remembered the weight of his rifle. Laughter from the council echoed faintly in his mind. Children's sticks, they had called it. Toys. But children didn't wait like statues in the dirt, invisible until the moment came. Children didn't carve victory from silence. He felt the faintest curl of a smile touch his lips. The war had not yet begun, not truly. The battlefield burned with light. Flashes of plasma tore across the void, scattering into useless sparks as Dominion armor absorbed the punishment. Coalition ships spun and broke apart, their wreckage tumbling into the abyss. What was meant to be a decisive victory unfolded instead as a rout, the same pattern repeating as before. Elias Rourke stood within the Coalition's forward operations vessel, his gaze steady on the tactical display. Around him, alien officers shouted in a dozen languages, their overlapping panic strained through the translation matrix into a single frantic chorus. The enemy's counters were merciless. Drones, once symbols of technological supremacy, now spiraled against their masters, firing back on Coalition formations. Power cores overheated under relentless strain, forcing entire batteries to shut down. Every solution the Coalition had invested in crumbled under Dominion precision. Rourke's hands rested on the strap of his rifle case. He could feel the subtle vibration of engines through the deck beneath his boots, the hum of a ship that believed itself mighty but now quivered like prey. He said nothing, for nothing needed saying. The proof was here, in metal breaking apart outside. When the order for ground deployment came, the humans were once again shuffled to the periphery. Coalition commanders believed their mechanized infantry and energy weapons would crush Dominion troops in close combat. They underestimated how far Dominion mastery extended. The drop into Ashari's atmosphere shook the transports. Fire streaked across the hulls, engines screaming as they cut through turbulence. Through the viewport, Rourke saw the surface, shattered plains, ridges of black stone, and the glow of cities long reduced to ash. The Dominion had chosen the battlefield well. Open ground, no cover for armies that relied on brute force and spectacle. Coalition soldiers marched off the transports in gleaming lines, armor radiant with powered shields. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, banners glowing with symbols of their species. Rourke and the other humans disembarked quietly, rifles slung across their backs, their presence ignored by most. The first engagement came swiftly. Dominion infantry advanced with mechanical discipline, their black armor reflecting no light, their formations precise. Coalition troops unleashed torrents of plasma, rail slugs, and energy bolts. For a moment, the battlefield glowed like a sun. Then the Dominion responded. Shields shimmered and held. Their counterfire lanced across the plain, silent beams cutting through coalition armor as though it were paper. Drone packs, freshly hijacked, turned on their former allies and tore through flanks. Within minutes, what had begun as a confident advance devolved into panic. Soldiers broke formation, retreating in confusion as Dominion fire shredded their ranks. Rourke crouched behind a crumbled wall, his squad of human snipers with him. Callan knelt to his right, his jaw tight, rifle balanced across his knee. Around them, the coalition's carefully orchestrated assault collapsed. "They're folding already," Callan muttered. "Watch," Rourke said. He raised his rifle, the scope catching glints of black armor across the field. Dominion officers moved among their troops, directing formations with curt gestures. To coalition commanders, these officers were faceless enemies. To Rourke, they were targets. He steadied his breathing. The chaos around him dimmed to nothing. Only the wind across the plain mattered, the angle of distance, the rhythm of his pulse. He squeezed the trigger. A Dominion officer fell backward, his helmet snapping apart with the impact. His soldiers hesitated, looking around for the source. Before they could react, another shot cracked, and a second officer dropped. Callan fired next, his bullet tearing through the visor of a Dominion heavy trooper. The squad moved like an old machine, finally brought back to life. One shot, one body. Another. Then another. Each strike was quiet compared to the screaming of plasma and drones, but its effect rippled across the battlefield. Coalition soldiers stumbled, confused by the sudden disruption. Then they saw it. Their enemies hesitating, lines faltering where unseen hands plucked leaders from existence. The aliens had mock human rifles as toys, yet no toy spread panic like this. Rourke's squad advanced methodically, taking positions among ruins and ridges. They worked without spectacle, no glowing armor, no roaring weapons. Each shot was invisible, untraceable. The Dominion shields, designed to refract light and energy, did nothing against a simple piece of metal traveling faster than sound. The effect grew. Officers refused to expose themselves. Troops faltered without direction. Coalition survivors rallied behind the sudden disruption, using the pause to regroup. Still, the battle was far from won. Dominion forces adapted quickly, deploying heavier units to flush out the hidden marksmen. Massive walkers strode forward, cannons thundering into the ruins. The ground shook as stone walls collapsed around Rourke's squad. "Back," Rourke ordered. His voice was calm, measured. Panic was for others. His men shifted positions, melting into new cover before the walkers could lock them down. Callan cursed under his breath. "They're learning. Won't be long before they bring air support." "Then we make this count," Rourke said. He lifted his rifle again, this time searching not for officers, but for weak points in the walker's armor. He found it, a narrow seam along the joint of a leg, almost invisible to the naked eye. He exhaled, squeezed, and watched the machine buckle as the round tore through its vulnerable point. The walker collapsed sideways, crushing soldiers beneath it. For the first time, the Dominion advance slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. Enough for coalition forces to catch breath, to remember that they were not invincible prey. Around the field, whispers spread. Soldiers who had sneered at human weapons now clung to the cover snipers provided. They began marking targets, feeding information to the humans who could make those targets vanish. Respect was dawning, edged with desperation. As dusk fell, the battle quieted into stalemate. Fires burned across the plain, bodies scattered in grim testimony. Coalition forces limped back into a defensive perimeter. Rourke and his squad returned last, their rifles heavy but unbowed. Inside the command shelter, alien generals argued in hushed, desperate tones. Their pride was cracked, though not yet broken. They avoided looking at the humans, as though acknowledging them would cost too much. But the battlefield had spoken more clearly than any council chamber. Callan dropped into a chair, sweat streaking his face, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. "They won't mock us again." "Not yet," Rourke said. He leaned his rifle against the wall and rubbed at the bridge of his nose. He knew arrogance didn't die so easily. But seeds had been planted today, seeds watered with blood. Outside, the night wind carried the smell of scorched stone and ozone. The Coalition had survived a battle they should have lost utterly, not because of brilliance or technology, but because a handful of humans had reminded them of something they had forgotten. War was not about shining lights or grand displays. It was about patience, precision, and the will to endure. Rourke sat in silence, listening to the muted sounds of repair crews and medics. The war was far from decided, but the shape of it was beginning to shift. He could feel it in the air, sharp as the edge of a bullet. The Dominion would adapt. The Coalition would argue. And when the next clash came, the Crosshairs would be waiting. The battlefield of Ashari did not heal. Weeks passed, yet the plains remained littered with twisted wreckage and the husks of broken machines. Fires smoldered beneath black stone, sending smoke into a sky stained red with ash. The Dominion had withdrawn after their advance stalled, but no one believed it was retreat. It was a pause, a coiling of strength before the next strike. The Coalition used the lull to regroup. Their generals gathered in hushed circles, voices stripped of laughter now. Pride had been burned out of them by the steady precision of human rifles. Still, the aliens would not say it openly. They spoke of adjustments to doctrine and supplemental precision support. But everyone knew the truth. The Coalition fought differently now because of the humans. Elias Rourke walked the edges of the makeshift camp, boots crunching on stone, his rifle resting against his shoulder. Soldiers watched him as he passed, their eyes no longer filled with disdain, but with something sharper, curiosity, even respect. The same voices that once called his weapon a relic now asked how far it could reach, how it cut through armor no beam could touch. He answered few questions. Word would not teach them what mattered most. At night, when the fires burned low and silence settled over the camp, Rourke trained them anyway. Not the proud generals or polished commanders, but the younger soldiers, those willing to listen. He showed them how to use shadow and silence, how to wait without fidgeting, how to watch for the smallest shift in an enemy's stance. Many struggled. Their instincts drove them to rush, to act, to make noise. Rourke corrected them with patience carved from years of practice. Callan assisted, his voice sharper than Rourke's, less forgiving. Where Rourke embodied calm, Callan demanded discipline. Together they forged small groups into something different. Fighters who thought not in beams of light, but in lines of sight, who began to understand that sometimes the deadliest weapon was patience itself. The Dominion, too, adapted. Scouts reported enemy forces deploying heavier, shielding on their officers, layers of armor designed to withstand the invisible strikes of human rifles. Spotters were assigned to scan for muzzle flashes, though they found none. The Dominion had fought countless wars, and their response was systematic. Yet every adjustment carried a flaw, and Rourke sought those flaws like a predator seeking weakness and prey. On one patrol across the ruins, Rourke's squad observed a Dominion convoy threading through a ravine. Walkers guarded its flanks, and officers strode confidently behind their new shields. Rourke studied the pattern through his scope, tracing seams, noting timing. The shields were strong, but they were heavy. Each officer moved slower, their armor unwieldy in tight formations. When the first shot rang out, it struck not the chest plate, but the exposed throat joint beneath the helmet. The officer collapsed instantly. Panic rippled down the line. Soldiers raised their shields higher, but Callan's shot came from another angle, threading through an armpit seam. Another officer dropped. Within minutes, the convoy scattered, abandoning supplies in fear of ghosts they could not see. Rourke's squad exfiltrated silently, their rifles carried low, their faces expressionless. Word spread quickly. To the coalition, these small victories became lifelines, proof that the Dominion could bleed. To the Dominion, they became nightmares, tales of unseen hunters who could reach through their strongest armor and drag leaders into death. Fear seeped into their ranks, slow but steady. In the command shelters, alien officers began asking questions they had never asked before. Could humans teach them the art of concealment? Could they show them how to wait unseen, how to choose the perfect shot? Rourke gave them fragments. He demonstrated how to blend into rubble, how to align sight lines with natural cover. But he knew most would never master it. Patience was not in their blood. Their minds were tuned for speed, not silence. Callan was less generous. They don't get it, he muttered one night after drills. They'll never get it. They think it's about the gun. It's not. It's about the man holding it. Rourke cleaned his rifle with slow, deliberate motions. Some of them will learn enough to survive. That's all they need. And us. Rourke looked up, his eyes catching the dim light. We're here to remind them that survival is never guaranteed. The next major battle came sooner than expected. Dominion forces struck with ferocity, their advance sweeping through the outer defenses like a tide. Coalition units scrambled to hold ground, their lines buckling under pressure. Amid the chaos, Rourke's squad was deployed to the northern ridge overlooking the plain. From that vantage, they could see the full scope of the enemy advance, waves of black armor moving with chilling precision. Rourke lay prone on the ridge, scope pressed his eye. His breath slowed, his heartbeat steady. Targets moved across his vision. Officers, relay drones, artillery operators. Each one carried the Dominion forward. Each one could be erased with a single shot. Pick your targets, Rourke murmured. Make them count. The squad fired as one. Officers collapsed mid-command. Drones fell from the air. Artillery crews scattered. Each shot carved silence into the Dominion's order. For the first time, their advance faltered. Coalition soldiers on the plain seized the moment, rallying behind the disruption to strike back. But the Dominion was relentless. They shifted tactics, pushing forward massive siege engines shielded by walls of infantry. The ridge shook as cannons roared, stone erupting around the snipers' positions. Rourke did not flinch. He shifted aim to the Engine's support crews, dismantling them piece by piece. The machines slowed, then stalled, caught in the collapse of their own infrastructure. Hours passed. The battlefield became a blur of fire and shadow, the air heavy with dust and blood. By the time night fell, the Dominion advance had been blunted, their formations fractured. Coalition forces stood bloodied but unbroken, their survival owed not to blinding light or overwhelming firepower, but to the steady rhythm of unseen rifles. When the guns finally fell silent, Rourke and his squad withdrew. Exhaustion weighed on them, but they carried themselves with the quiet certainty of men who knew their value now stood beyond question. In the command shelter, the coalition's leaders bowed their heads, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in something closer to respect. They did not say it aloud, but their eyes told the story. Without the humans, the war would already be lost. Rourke sat apart, rifle resting across his knees, his expression unreadable. The war was far from over, and he knew the Dominion would not suffer humiliation long. They would adapt again, harder, sharper. But for now, the coalition had learned a truth it could not ignore. Silence could be deadlier than light. Patience could break empires. And in the crosshairs of a human rifle, the Dominion had discovered something they had never accounted for: fear. The Dominion came again, not in probing strikes or cautious pushes, but in a wave meant to end everything. Their fleets blackened the skies of Eshari, blotting out the stars, their ground armies rolling forward with mechanical precision. This was no test of strength, no exchange of feints. It was annihilation in motion. Coalition generals huddled in their shelters, their voices tight, their plans brittle. They spoke of holding lines, of buying time, of bleeding slowly until reinforcements arrived. But everyone knew reinforcements would come too late. If the Dominion broke through here, the Coalition would fracture, its member worlds consumed one by one. Elias Rourke cleaned his rifle in silence. Around him, his squad prepared with methodical care. They checked ammunition, adjusted scopes, measured wind with devices they had long since learned to replace with instinct. Callan sat close, his hands steady despite the weight of what loomed ahead. They all understood this might be the end. When the order came, it was simple: hold the ridge at all costs. Rourke and his squad took their positions before dawn, the battlefield still shrouded in the last shadows of night. Below them stretched the plain, scarred by weeks of fighting, now trembling with the advance of an empire. The Dominion moved with terrifying discipline. Columns of armor rolled forward in perfect formation. Walkers marched in lockstep, their cannons primed. Above them, carriers unleashed swarms of drones, their black wings blotting the light as they swept low across the plain. At the heart of it all, shielded in a fortress of steel and soldiers, advanced the Dominion's supreme commander. Rourke adjusted his scope. The commander was a shadow behind layers of armor, his presence marked by the banners carried at his side. To the Coalition, that figure embodied inevitability. To Rourke, he was a target. The battle began with thunder. Coalition artillery roared, their shells carving fire across the field. Plasma bolts arced in blinding streams. The Dominion answered with silence sharpened into precision. Their counterfire gutted bunkers and shattered lines. Soldiers screamed across open calms, voices drowned in static and fear. Rourke lay flat, breath steady. His rifle rose and fell with the rhythm of his chest. He did not aim for the endless tide of soldiers. He did not waste bullets on drones. He sought only the threads that held the Dominion's tapestry together. An artillery officer here, a relay operator there. Each shot plucked a string, unraveling discipline. Callan's voice came through the squad channel. They're pressing hard on the left. If they break through, they won't, Rourke said, though he knew the line was bleeding badly. He focused through his scope, watching the Supreme Commander's fortress advance. Layer after layer of shields shimmered, designed to withstand any beam, any blast. But Rourke was not carrying beams. His weapon was older, simpler, unassuming. He adjusted his aim, tracing the weak points in the fortress. The joints of a walker leg, the slits where air cycled through exhaust vents. He squeezed the trigger, and metal screamed as a walker buckled sideways. He fired again, and a vent spat fire as its systems collapsed. The fortress slowed, its shield straining to cover gaps. The Coalition forces below saw the cracks and surged forward. For a heartbeat, hope flickered, but the Dominion responded with brutal speed. Reserves poured into the breach, drones descended in black clouds, and the advance pressed on. The ridge shook under bombardment. Explosions tore through stone, showering Rourke's squad with dust and debris. One of his men went silent mid-report, his position consumed by fire. Another called out coordinates before static swallowed his voice. Still, the survivors held their rifles steady. Callan's shot pierced the visor of a Dominion captain. "We can't keep this up forever." "We don't need forever," Rourke answered. His eyes stayed on the Supreme Commander, still advancing, still wrapped in walls of steel. Every calculation narrowed to this moment. The war would not be decided by endless volleys or glowing weapons. It would be decided by one shot. He slowed his breathing. The world shrank to the circle of his scope. Distance, wind, movement, all fell into place. The commander turned slightly, his armored shoulder catching the faintest glint of light. Beneath that armor was a seam, a flaw small enough to be overlooked by anyone not trained to search for weakness. Rourke exhaled. The trigger yielded beneath his finger. The bullet flew unseen. No beam, no flare, no signal. Only silence. A moment later, the commander staggered, his armor breached. For an instant, the battlefield held its breath. Then the figure collapsed, banners tumbling into the dirt. The Dominion's advance faltered. Orders ceased. Troops hesitated, their perfect formations breaking into confusion. Drones veered without guidance, crashing into the ground. The coalition saw the hesitation and struck with everything they had left. The plain erupted in fire and steel. Dominion soldiers fought on, but the cohesion that made them unstoppable was gone. Piece by piece, their advance unraveled, until what had been a wave of annihilation became fragments scattered across the field. From the ridge, Rourke watched it unfold. He felt no triumph, no exhilaration, only the heavy weight of certainty. One shot had ended the Dominion's momentum, but it cost blood, sweat, and silence to reach that moment. Around him, his squad counted their losses, their voices tired but alive. Callan clapped him on the shoulder, his eyes fierce. "You did it." Rourke shook his head. "We did what we had to." The coalition celebrated that night, though the fires of battle still smoldered across the horizon. Generals raised toasts, speeches spoke of resilience and courage. None laughed at the humans now. Their eyes turned to them with something deeper than respect, dependence. Rourke sat apart from the revelry, rifle across his knees. He knew the Dominion was not destroyed. Empires did not die in a day, and fear could harden into fury. But a shift had occurred. The coalition had seen the power of patience, the terror of silence, the strength hidden in simplicity. He cleaned his rifle as the night wore on, the motion steady, familiar. Around him, the camp buzzed with voices, but his mind was quiet. Tomorrow there would be another battle, another ridge, another shot. That was the way of war. When Callan approached, carrying 2 mugs of bitter stimulant, he handed one over without a word. They drank in silence, watching the fires flicker across the plains. "Think they'll ever stop underestimating us?" Callan asked finally. Rourke set his mug down, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Doesn't matter if they do. By the time they remember what we are, it'll already be too late." He lifted his rifle, checked the scope, and rested it across his lap once more. Somewhere in the darkness, the Dominion was regrouping. Somewhere, new commanders were rising to fill the void. And when they came, when they marched with confidence that their empire was eternal, Rourke knew what awaited them. A patient eye, a steady breath, and the crosshairs of a human rifle.